Hi, and welcome back to the Power of Dialogue. We're at a slightly different time this week because we all ended up having different commitments, mainly George, massive pain for us. Unfortunately, we do not have Tom here today as he is having to look after a new puppy. Tried to persuade him to bring it on for more viewers, but that didn't go particularly well. Um, so let's kind of get right into it. We'll hopefully be back at normal time next week.
What even is
so-
normal?
No, it's 2 o'clock on a Tuesday, and on Wednesday normally.
Yeah.
Even I'm forgetting the normal time by this point. We've moved it so many times. So this week's been a bit slow, but in places. This weekend was extremely slow. But there have been a few quite interesting areas that have come up. First one that I think we really wanted to definitely all talk about was schools. And the plan for schools to be going back. I think it's in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah.
Start of June.
And that is for your reception year 1 and year 6, I believe.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of controversy going on around this currently. I've seen that the British Medical Association have also gone, that's not a good idea.
Yeah. I think the main thing to do with schools going back, and the main thing that the teachers union is most worried about with the schools going back, is the fact that they haven't set up, and it's been confirmed. So I think that it won't be until the 1st of June that the test and track sort of app system that they're trying to set up will be in place, and obviously it's a bit uncertain whether or not that will be an effective app and method of track and trace, and so I think that's where most of the teachers are worried about going back into schools, is if they haven't got an effective track and trace system, then they're left unguarded against the virus.
Yeah. Just remind me, because I'm always really bad with school years. What ages are we actually talking about with these?
Reception is 3 and 4 years, 3 and 4 year olds, I think, and year 1 is 4 and 5, I think.
Yeah. And year 6 is like 10.
Year 6 is 10, 11. Yeah. Year 10 and 11 year olds, which I can understand why the government want to get the primary schools open, because obviously trying to take care of a young child and then also work from home, or now going back into a workplace, is very difficult, and especially for poorer families who don't have the option of hiring a nanny, and even hiring a nanny has been slightly doused in controversy whether you should or shouldn't hire one. But poorer families don't have that option, and so for them it's either you don't go to work and you could risk losing your job, or you send your children back to school. And so I think it's a good idea to try and start sending children back to school, but I don't think we're at that point yet where we have the safety measures in place to be able to do that. I think it's a bit too soon that we've started to try and get young children back in school.
I think, kind of thinking about it, I'm not a psychologist. This is speculation on my part, and also just kind of looking at different things. But of course, these school ages they are wanting to send back are probably some of the ones that is actually most important to be sent back to school, because they're not old enough to understand that this isn't the normal. Now, it's been going on for over 2 months now. Kids don't always remember things, especially in that age, from kind of before. So they're getting into that age where the government also wants to actually put into place that yes, you do go to a school, whether or not you disagree with schooling in whatever way. So I think that might be another reason behind them deciding to send those particular years back.
I think definitely that will play into the thinking of policy decisions. But with those sort of younger aged kids, I think it's more difficult if you don't excuse me, if you don't have a track and trace system. It's more difficult to get those children to social distance, because younger children they won't understand why they need to do it, and they'll see their friends and go, oh, it's my friend, I want to go play with them. So I think sending those kids back I think I can see why they want to do it, but in the end, actually getting down to it, even though it's a very small risk that people get, that those kids will have COVID very seriously. For the small percentage that might have COVID very seriously, it could kill like some very young children, which would be devastating for families.
Yeah. I think it's also interesting to note that there's with the app, there seems to have hit a block as well though on that. I haven't heard anything. There's no even vague release dates they're actually talking about for actually getting out into the general public.
Exactly, which is why it's problematic, because what they're doing is they're going, oh, we might release an app before schools come back, but we also might not. And if we do, there's no proof or there's no evidence that the app will actually work.
Yeah, sorry, yes, Ryan.
I'm sorry, I'm struggling to see the connection between the contact tracing app and reception and year one kids who, even nowadays, please don't tell me reception kids have their own phones.
I've met quite a few who do.
To run. Yeah.
Well, I've met a few who do, but it's also important to know that if one person in a household has it, it's very likely that the whole household will have it. And so it's more to do with the adults, the parents of those kids, having that contact tracing app.
Yeah.
And then if they've been in contact with people with symptoms, it is very likely that their child will have been in contact with that same person with symptoms, or obviously they will have been in contact with their parents who will have come into contact with someone with those symptoms.
Yeah.
That makes it a lot clearer, because from the school's point of view, if you have a child who then rings the school to say, oh, they've now developed symptoms, you can tell their class to stay at home or whatever quite easily. You know who they were around, whereas it's more people you meet on trains who you've never met before that the app's better for. But yeah.
I think on the app front as well, just quickly, I found it actually quite funny earlier that I saw a report saying that they've actually haven't put in the feature yet to say you've got symptoms.
Jesus.
They haven't dealing with. You say you've got symptoms. They haven't yet connected it to testing. You haven't. If you get a positive test, you can't put that in yet.
Yeah. Which seems a bit weird.
It does seem a bit weird.
But there was concerns over members of the general public. Their only way that they could get a test through falsely reporting symptoms, because they want to get a test to see if they have it asymptomatic. And that could just lead to everyone just saying they have it to get a test. So there are problems over.
I think if the government's response is because they've talked a lot about common sense and people using their common sense. I don't think it is not common sense to just fake the fact you might have symptoms in order to get a test. I understand that some people will do that. Some people will be very worried, and some people will possibly fake having symptoms in order to get a test. But I wouldn't say it's a significant number. It's not a significant amount that will do that.
But even if it's not a significant number, if it reaches a point where there are like too many false positives, if it were, of people getting warned, then it undermines the entire system and no one will use it. Which,
yeah, I mean, I see kind of that aspect of it as well. But I think that, as with any system, there'll always be these loopholes with them, and so no app system can ever be perfect, and so it's going to be extremely hard to then plan for all of those things. So no matter what, you're always going to have those people faking, you're always going to bring across those false positives. But if anything, that will just have more people staying at home.
Yeah.
Which isn't necessarily a bad outcome.
I think the one interesting thing is I don't know if there's any restrictions on how often you can apply for a test. So I think it would make sense if you applied for a test. You could say you can't apply for another test within the following week because it's meant to be 7 days that the coronavirus is you can test for it. I think it might be 14 days the incubation period, but 7 days is the current. If you have symptoms, then isolate for 7 days.
And then your household has to self isolate for 14.
Yeah, and so I think it might be a good idea that once you've taken the test, you can't apply for another test for a week, because then even if people are it will then discourage people to just get them because they might have it, because if they do develop symptoms, they have to wait to get another one. But then also it will help in terms of the government capacity. It will help to test more people if you can only get one a week. Obviously, it will be very difficult to sort of enforce that without having some sort of login registration and putting your name into the government website, which I think is possible, but I think it's something to look into for.
Yeah. Ryan, we've lost you on the main streaming computer, I think.
Oh?
Yeah, your camera's just gone.
Oh, he's okay on mine.
Yeah, he's okay on my kind of the one I used to record this, and then there we go, you're back. Sorry about that.
Right.
I
think
the
next interesting thing in terms of reopening schools and reopening workplaces is what they're going to do in terms of reopening schools in September, whether or not in September they'll reopen schools but have to maintain some social distancing measures, or whether or not they'll reopen schools entirely. I think that also applies to universities, whether or not universities will reopen normally, because at the moment you have students who are still paying full tuition fees, full maintenance, and yet they're not receiving face-to-face tuition. And so I think it will be very interesting in September to see where we're at and what the government will do to try and get people back to school in September.
I think it's interesting as well is I've heard through a few kind of personal channels that some colleges are looking to send back students pretty soon. So some sixth form colleges.
I think in terms of sixth form colleges, it probably makes more sense to get year 12s back.
Yeah.
Than it does for
you
year
and I
13s. Yeah, but I think it makes more sense to get year 12s back, because they're the ones who it will have a real impact on their exams next year. It has a massive impact on their exams next year, and they're also far more capable of having a bit more common sense and following social distancing measures than those in primary school, because obviously they're young adults. They're nearly there, and I think it makes it's a lot easier for sort of teenagers to see reason and follow social distancing measures. I think that also have to be strongly enforced within colleges, but I think getting year 12s and year 10s I think back will be crucial in the next sort of phase.
Yeah, definitely. It's going to be interesting seeing how long it's going to be for schools to actually catch up on work missed and things like that as well.
It will be interesting to see. I think that the government needs to take into account this. It has to take into account in terms of exams next year, this massive gap in learning that the year 12 and year 10s have had.
The exam system automatically takes into account year-to-year variations, because they set the grade boundaries after the exams have been done.
It does. However, those who have more facilities at home will be far. in this period will have a
So,
far the
I think
learning.
it would be better for a pupil premium catch-up type extra funding for schools to support people in preparing for the exams. I don't think the exams should be changed to reflect your access to technology.
I don't think the exams should be changed, but I think there should be something done to help those who are not able to access facilities to at this point that would further their knowledge and their learning.
Well, here's an interesting one for you. What about school over the summer holidays? It's not like you're going on holiday anywhere. My school is going to consult on extending our term by 2 weeks, and I'll be all for it, to be honest. Just want to be back at school. That's one way of ensuring that people learn if the public health situation allows schools to be open in July.
I think if you're going to do that, I think it shouldn't be compulsory.
Yeah,
none of going back to school is going to be compulsory until September, at least.
Yeah, until September at least. I think if schools want to do that and then students feel comfortable, I think they should also facilitate online learning during that point, because some students will not feel comfortable physically going back to school.
Yeah. I mean, on that note, not a student, but I was hearing a story from someone the other day who was saying that she left her house for the first time since lockdown began. I think it was the day before yesterday, and that's not even going in their back garden, in the house, because there are these people who are very either germaphobes or things like that, who are also on edge about things a lot.
Yeah, I think those. I think it's those with underlying health conditions that will be most worried. Students with underlying health conditions that will be most worried. But even then, you don't have to have an underlying health condition to be really badly affected by this. It is among students. It's a bit of a lottery whether or not if you do get it, how badly those symptoms are expressed.
I think it's a shame. I think what could be interesting is if they, with vaccine trials, of course, that they're now aiming for 30 million doses by September, provided the current trials work. Be interesting to see, maybe do some extra trials in schools with the vaccines. Obviously, you can't, because I'm pretty sure that violates human rights.
They can't give children can't give that level of informed consent for experimental medical treatments.
But I think that that's probably one of the primary ways that we can actually study to see the effect on the. I'm not saying they should do this, by the way. Just for I'm not saying we dose up children with a bunch of uncertain vaccines. I'm saying once it becomes available, it will be one of the ways I think will probably be most interesting to see.
When it's safe and is being rolled out, give it to children, because those are super spreaders, because they have no hygiene. Yeah.
I think I'm not proposing right now. We just kind of inject children.
Yeah, I think that's also why there's been sort of worries about primary schools reopening. It isn't just because of the track and trace app. It's because it's to do with the safety of teachers, because the teachers obviously aren't going to be getting in full PPE to go and teach maths, and so because children are super spreaders, they'll take it to every single household in the community if they do have it. And so that's why it's so important, this track and trace app. And even if you're unsure whether or not you have it, if you have any of the symptoms, do you have those children stay at home?
Yeah,
I think that's also why it's been highly debated whether or not primary schools should reopen, because younger children are probably the biggest spreader of any type of illness.
But look at kind of the way a lot of parents act as well when they say have a child with measles or chickenpox, something like that. They will still send that child to school.
Yeah, it's sometimes they don't have a choice. Sometimes they have to go to work. They've got no other choice but to send them to school. And so I think at that point it isn't the school's job. School's job isn't childcare. And I think that you need more support for parents who are during this time who are in financial difficulty, and I think that there needs to be legislation in order to help support those who are hardest hit by this. Because I think I don't know what sort of legislation there is for job retention at the minute. I know there's the furlough scheme, but if you're back from furlough, I think at the minute it's just sort of on the goodwill of the employer to keep you on, even if you can't go to work sometimes. And so I think having it on the goodwill of the employer is often very, very questionable, because not all employers have a lot of goodwill.
Yeah. No, I think that, I mean, schools is one of those topics. I don't think there's actually, I think there's always going to be a slight flaw with any plan. It's one of those areas that I don't think there is a perfect plan for it. If you wait too long, too many children are going to miss out on education. If you do it too quickly, then we could have, you know, a second peak in schools, like we've seen with care homes. You know, there is no perfect solution to it.
One thing that was interesting when I've seen stuff for this, apparently there are schools that still belong to local authorities, under local authority control. I thought the Tories had long since achieved their making every school a academy, especially in secondary. Lots of primary schools are still local authority control, but some local authorities have been saying, we're not going to open any of our schools, apart from all the academies which go, we are, because we don't listen to you, we're not controlled by you.
I think the broad opening of schools across the entirety of England at the minute, I think it's sort of they're trying to paint England entirely as one broad stroke brush, which I think is very problematic, because obviously in some areas there's far more cases, the R rate is far higher, and then in others there's a low amount of cases. Like here in the southwest, it would make a lot more sense to reopen schools because we've had a really low number of cases, and we're not, you know, we pretty much went up and then flatlined pretty much immediately, and have just sort of carried on along that flat line, and it's nearly heading downwards from the peak. And so it would make a lot more sense to open schools here, because we have far fewer cases, which means it's far less likely to spread.
Yeah.
But the data for that is very, like, uncertain. Breaking it down regionally is really, they haven't got high enough quality data to do much regional breakdowns. We've got quite wide region stuff that they're just starting, scientists are just starting to get published, but
yeah, I think there's a lot of, you know, I think, as I was saying just now, you know, schools are one of the core elements of our society, you know, education, but also it could all be one of our downfalls if we get it wrong, and, you know, be the end of society, to be all morbid and dramatic.
Well, I don't think it'll be the end of society. I think that society may have to change because of this. I think it's exposed some of our failings in society. The biggest one is care homes and social care. That's the biggest failing that was exposed. And I think the second biggest was the NHS. But I think the NHS.
I thought you were going to say the Tory government for a minute then.
I'm not gonna. That may be my personal opinion, but I know that, you know, it isn't everyone's, and so I'm trying to take a balanced view here. I think the NHS, in terms of just levels of PPE, that was the thing that was really lacking in the NHS. I think the NHS did a fantastic job, has done a fantastic job, and continues to do a fantastic job in terms of they haven't been overwhelmed in terms of capacity. The NHS capacity is there, but the equipment to protect doctors and nurses isn't, which is the one thing which needs to be looked into.
It was interesting. I saw a report, I can't remember where it was the other day, actually going, we actually had a lot of things like masks and gloves and things like that we have like a massive warehouse.
They were all.
We didn't have gowns.
Yeah, they recommended gowns should be purchased like a year ago by the group that oversees it, and it just never got round to being done. We have loads of gloves. We've got an excess of gloves. There's enough gloves for people in hospital. That's not what we've run out of.
Enough masks as well, actually, is the other.
But gowns have been in short supply from the very beginning.
Yeah.
I think also some of the stockpiled PPE was actually had its gone past expiry date.
But with expiry dates, like, you have to manufacture it and then wait for it to reach its expiry date and then retest it to see whether it still works or not. Otherwise, you could only, like, you have to, with stuff you've tested for 5 years, you have to at most if you've been producing it for 5 years, you'd only really put a 5-year expiry date on, because you don't know what it does after 5 years. Doesn't mean the day after, like, fresh meat, it suddenly becomes infectious and will kill you. So some relabeling might be a bit bad, but if it has scientifically been tested and is still fine, then relabeling things isn't necessarily.
I don't think it's a bad thing, but I think the fact it was just, I think a lot of the problem was that we couldn't get it out because it was expired and then it hadn't been tested. And so I think there needs to be a better system in terms of testing PPE to make sure that it can get out there if it needs to be.
See, the question is, though, is how much, like, obviously this kind of notice we have had shortcomings with our PPE, but we're probably not going to have another instance where we're going to need PPE. Like, if you look at the trends, it's probably going to be about another 90, 100 years maybe before we have a next big thing. We follow, a big pandemic.
I understand.
So what's the point of stocking all of it now, and then it's just going to be it's going to be 85 years out of date by the end of it?
Well, I don't think you have to stock it all now, but you need to make sure that you have the processes in place for the next time this happens. Because I know the trend is it'll happen in 100 years' time, but what if it happens in like another 10 years' time? Because it could happen. Because it's entirely unpredictable, when viruses or diseases mutate and become problematic to the human race.
Yeah.
But it's and so it's important that you can put in robust processes that can handle this sort of situation. Again, I think it was our lack of preparedness that was our downfall. It wasn't the fact that we didn't it wasn't the fact that we didn't have, or we had sort of expertise, and we have the correct amount of, we have the facilities to be able to deal with something like this, but we don't have the processes in place to deal with it effectively.
Yeah.
And so that's what needs to be put in place and learn from this pandemic is we need the better processes to be put in place.
Yeah. Just kind of an extra little fun thing I was thinking about, just kind of there. As of up till now in this pandemic, what is one thing that you think that you're taking away from this? Mine would probably have to be, let's not eat bats. What would you guys kind of say your one kind of big thing of, we need to either improve this or we did this well, let's make sure we keep doing that? What is that one?
One thing.
One takeaway from it is, I think never ever privatise the NHS. I think that's the one thing I'm taking away from it, is that the NHS is possibly our most, in fact, it is our most valuable public service, and I think that it would be a travesty if we ever privatised the NHS.
Make it also privatised at the point of access, not
privatised at the point of access.
Elements of it are already privatised.
I know elements of it are already privatised.
I'll just clarifying that.
Occasionally having private companies help the NHS is not a bad thing, because private companies can sometimes be more efficient, can have better better equipment.
Well, most pharmaceutical companies are private companies. They might get public money to research and develop things, but
Yeah, but I think privatizing the NHS at point of access would be catastrophic.
I think I'm going to go after the World Health Organization, as it seems that they have, for the organization in charge of global health, that they've kind of been on the sidelines / widely ignored. I don't want to align myself with Trump, who is also having a go at them recently, but he just has a go at everything that requires cooperation. But they not to recognizing Taiwan as a good example of public health, because there's problems with China, because China doesn't recognize Taiwan as Taiwan, or whatever. That they haven't really, for the organization that should be coordinating the global response, the only thing they've gave us is a name, and at one point they just came out and went, by the way, it's a pandemic now.
I think in terms of the World Health Organization, I think they're very limited by what they can actually do, because obviously you can't infringe on sovereignty of any countries, and they have to try and remain as apolitical as possible and just as a scientific body. I wouldn't say they did have a few shortcomings during this. I think they said don't restrict international travel very early on, which turned out, I think, to be a big mistake. I think that if, like New Zealand sort of just shut off travel. It became entirely isolated, and New Zealand's response is possibly one of the best, if not the best, response to the virus in the world. And so I think that advice to not shut off travel was very, I think it was more economically in the short term. It was thinking about the economics of the short term. But however, I think if countries shut down their borders very early on, then it means they could have come out of that shutdown and lockdown a lot quicker than
that's
we
one
are.
of the first things I said as well. Like when they kind of started talking about kind of the coronavirus spreading, I was like, maybe we should lock everything down so it can't get in.
But by the point that you have a couple of cases, it's by the time
places like Spain and when we had a case in Spain, not in the UK.
Yeah, but it's like even if you have one or two cases in your country, say you have 100 cases in your country, if you have an extreme lockdown, like we've had before, like you cannot leave your house except for essential.
Not extreme, like everyone's out exercising.
Everyone was out exercising, but if you had an extreme lockdown, if you could only go out for essential food, or if you're a key worker, and then wait, you can then get control of the virus. You could have got control of the virus far quicker than we have, and so we've had to have an extended lockdown period because we weren't quick enough and decisive enough with our response.
I mean, and if we look at delays, have you guys heard that the current infection rate in America?
Oh God,
they're over 1.5 million.
Yeah, America is up. It's not going to go well. That's unfortunately for one of our closest allies, and who we're probably going to have to rely on a lot more post December 31st this year. I think they've had an absolutely horrific response to this virus. It just shows that you can't deny the facts of a virus, and it would have been far more economically sensible to shut down, have a period of where the economy regressed. It would have shrunk. Any economy is going to shrink during this crisis, but it will be able to bounce back a lot quicker if you don't have this widespread infection. I think America was driven by the, oh no, we need to keep the economy going. We need to keep the economy going at any cost. And I think that's where America is very different to a lot of other countries in the world. A lot of other countries in the world is like, yes, the economy is important, but human life is more important than the economy at this time. But America has been very economically centered in terms of the economy is the most important thing.
But like they haven't even taken measures to protect the economy. Like they had their huge stimulus, but everyone just went and got laid off. You have to say the furlough program is working quite well. There's been an increase in applications for universal credit or whatever, but they haven't skyrocketed on an unprecedented scale as much as they have in America.
Well, I think America is just Trump's incompetent. He's stupid. You can't compare Boris Johnson to Trump. I think it would be very naive to compare Boris Johnson to Trump, as a lot of people have. Boris Johnson is not Donald Trump. Boris Johnson, even if I believe he's a bit incompetent and makes, stupid decisions, he knows what he's doing. He knows the effect that his decisions are going to have, and whether or not that's more sinister than just Trump being.
He knows what he knows, and he knows what he doesn't know. Trump thinks he knows everything. He thinks his IQ is 1,000.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's one of my current favorite pastimes is just watching Trump lose at reporters.
Especially female reporters. I'm not sure I've seen him lose.
Female reporters from normally of an Asian origin.
CNN probably.
Yeah,
definitely.
Fox. Well, there aren't any of that demographic at Fox News, but the Fox News likes.
It's just. I think that's the one thing that everyone in the world can come together over is the fact that Trump has handled this absolutely terribly.
Yeah.
And I think he's definitely going to be re-elected president in November, because that's how it works.
I don't know. I'm still holding out hope that, because it was suggested that in 2016, 12% of Bernie Sanders supporters in 2016 voted for Trump over Hillary Clinton. And there's been suggestions that this time around, a far fewer percentage of the sort of very left progressives in the Democratic Party, they're more likely to vote for Biden after these 4 years of Trump, seeing how ridiculous it has been. They're far less likely to vote for him and far more likely to vote for Biden this time. But I think it really comes down to sort of just because American elections come down to just a few key swing states. So it really just depends how they perform in those sort of key swing states like Ohio, Pennsylvania, those sort of states that are just those will be the real tellers of whether or not Trump gets another 4 years.
I mean, we've also got the possibility that if there isn't a vaccine for coronavirus by the election, what they're going to do with that?
Yeah,
they have to basically. They kind of have to carry out the election between now and January the 20th.
Well, given that he is the executive, and I think most of it is organised by the government, and his government is incompetent, he'll carry out the election no matter what. This actually advantages Trump, this pandemic in the election, because those Biden supporters or those who are more left wing in America are far less likely to go out and vote to protect their own health, whereas a lot of Trump supporters we've seen have actually been going out and protesting, saying, don't take away my freedom to move around and do whatever I want. And so I think having this pandemic almost helps Trump at the election if there isn't a vaccine.
It's actually, I think, in the US system down to the states to decide the specifics, and then an election has to carry out. It cannot be pushed back like it could be in the UK if necessary.
Yeah,
it's written into the Constitution.
What I don't actually know the answer to this. Is there a possibility of a virtual election?
That would be very problematic.
It would be very problematic. There's so many reasons that we don't do online elections.
I think more use of postal ballots or write-in ballots, whatever they're called in the
I
US.
think-
But
Postal ballots in the US will skyrocket at this election.
there's lots of, you don't just have the free right to claim one. Some states don't let you use them over fears to do with fraud.
Goodness me, America is.
Mostly the Republican states, to be honest. But
Well, Republicans know low turnout's good for them.
yeah.
Well, I'm trying to figure out if there's anything else particularly that's happened this week. I don't think there's much other than the testing.
There's been the immigration bill that's being debated in Parliament.
Yeah, I'm not sure we have quite enough time to go into depth on that. Might have to do that next week.
Do we care about the EU? Because do we want to discuss it at all, or do we just not care? Brexit means Brexit.
We can discuss the EU, but I think it might take a lot longer than the time we have left.
Well, I don't think it will, because it doesn't really matter. Really, we're not in it. But because the reason you haven't heard of the EU, even though we're not in it, is because they haven't really done anything so far during this.
That is true.
Program. One of the things that they specifically haven't yet taken the power over is health. Health policy is still decided by national governments, so they're free to do what they want.
I think there's a lot of policy the EU haven't taken over that's still decided by national governments, but
yeah,
is definitely one of them. But I think the EU has been decidedly poor in their response.
The economic side, the EU does have some authority and to operate, and it kind of hasn't done anything until very recently. It seems that I think between the French Prime Minister and the German Chancellor have agreed a 500 billion euro grant to help support mostly Italy and the southern European countries that have been very badly affected.
Yeah.
So they've eventually done something, but that was agreed during this week.
Yeah, I think the EU have been very, very slow in terms of the response they offer, and that's just, I think it's purely just because there's so many countries in the EU, and it's very difficult to sort of negotiate and agree on a strategy.
Yeah, the Nordics have been holding out because they don't want to give away free money as grants. They only wanted loans, and the southern countries only wanted grants. They didn't want loans.
Yeah. Well, you can sort of understand it, because the Nordic countries are, other than possibly Sweden, who've gone for a more herd immunity strategy, the Nordic countries have fairly low numbers of cases. They've been dealing with it fairly well, fairly responsibly, and so you can sort of understand why they wouldn't want to just, throw money at
other countries,
European countries, because it's not their country. And so if it isn't a loan, then that's a large amount of money they're losing from their from their country, from their GDP.
Yeah, and if you
I
really
think they're lucky they were out of the EU for that, actually.
I don't know, because I think if we were still in the EU, I think we possibly would be one of the countries who would benefit from EU money, because we have I think we are one of the worst affected, if not the worst affected country in Europe.
It was worse affected in terms of economic status, not in terms of health.
Yeah.
So we've had a worse health situation, but our economy isn't going to collapse as much as Italy's is, because they have loads of public debt.
That is true.
And if you really care, you can go and research that the EU might go and open compliance procedures, essentially a lawsuit against Germany, because of something its court did against the European Court of Justice. Fascinating, but we haven't got time for that.
Yeah, I haven't actually heard much about that either. So
Yeah. Well, I don't think our country's paying too much attention to the EU at the minute. It's it's still a polarized issue, but it's sort of been and gone. The main thing now is what trade agreements we're going to get with the EU, but we haven't had any updates on what sort of negotiations are going on at the minute. Even though the government say that they're determined to, fully withdraw from the EU by December the 31st. We haven't had any sort of update on what's really going on there. So I think it's just
The big summit is due in June, is where the big progress review summit, where they'll actually have to have done something.
Yeah.
Not
So
that they've done anything.
holding out till then, I guess.
I think that one of the interesting things to kind of I was just thinking about this, is how as I've perceived it anyway, I think globalization has had a rather limited effect on this.
A limited effect.
As in, I don't think that most countries seem to be dealing with things on their own.
Yeah, the international, everyone's ignoring international organisations, just doing things their own. Like, we've been trying to do a lot with like the G7 and the G20. The US and Russia both didn't participate. No one's ever heard of the UN. The World Trade Organization, like at a key time for world trade, isn't doing anything.
Well, I think that the reason there's been sort of radio silence internationally is because you can't, without getting control of the virus in your country first, you can't then begin to sort of open up trade and trade talks and talk about international relief.
New trade talks. It's just things like countries which are main producers of like PPE putting on export bans on it. Normally, that would the World Trade Organization would at least come and make a statement saying they don't support trade export bans, because generally that's bad for the world.
Well, in this sort of virus, it is governments will be judged on how they do in their country, and so if exporters of PPE start shipping PPE and then they have a lack of PPE in their country, they're going to get crucified by the public. So
I mean, I was just saying I found it interesting how that there's been a definite lack of the global stage in this, and you'd think that there is, we often hear about the international organisations and things like that in other times, but we haven't really heard anything from them, even if that statement is, sorry dudes, we can't do anything.
Yeah. Well, I think it's highlighted, I think, almost how globalization has occurred, but I think that the real power still lies within nation states.
Definitely. It should do. They should voluntarily cooperate. We've been trying to cooperate, but no one else wants to cooperate with us, so it doesn't work.
Yeah. I just find it interesting at just, these things that we big up. I think in these times we actually see what countries are dependent on other ones maybe a bit more, and what ones are, maybe a bit more independent and not being as financially hit because they don't rely as much on the import exports.
Well, I think the US and the UK have the two biggest trade deficits in terms of we import far more than we export, and so I think we could be, but we have a fairly strong economy in comparison to a lot of the rest of the world, and so for sort of Western developed nations and China, because they're an economic superpower. Economically, I think all the sort of wealthy nations will fare fairly well economically. I think it will sort of ride this out. I think it could, because I think the idea is that the economies of wealthy nations should recover after people start to get back to work. after we start, producing, importing, exporting, tourism kicks in again. The idea is, especially if we can keep low interest rates to encourage spending, I think the idea is that the economy will have a bounce back rather than in sort of 2008, 2007, where there was a global recession and there wasn't going to be any bouncing back from that. I think the idea is, because this is entirely dependent on one health issue, the economy will recover faster.
In Western countries, whereas in developing countries where the governments are taking on large amounts of debt to spend on their healthcare, that's if they may not have the means to pay back that debt in the future.
I think it will take a hard hit on developing countries, but I think wealthy countries will. It will then be. I think it'll be very interesting to see if wealthier countries will support, and to what extent they'll support, developing nations who have debt after this crisis.
Yeah, definitely. On that note, I think let's call it there for this week. I think on that note, thank you to you two for joining me this week. It's been some very interesting, less structured than normal, but very interesting discussions. Thank you, as we're sure, to our many thousands of viewers. And see you guys all next week, hopefully at our more normal time that isn't our normal time, but is now our normal time.
Yep.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone.